In this video, we are going to be talking about .NET MAUI, the technology that you're going to be using as you work on your apps. .NET MAUI is short for Multi-Platform App UI, and it allows you to create an app from one code base that runs on multiple platforms. When you are working with .NET MAUI, you're going to actually be working with two different languages. XAML, which is a declarative language that allows you to lay out the user interface, and you are also going to be working with C# code that is going to interact with that user interface. The fundamental unit in a .NET MAUI app is a content page, and you will be creating a series of these, a series of classes that subclass content page in order to design your app. You can create your content pages, such as main page, entirely in code. Most of the time, though, you are going to be doing this in the Microsoft approved way. You are going to be creating some of this page, you're going to lay it out in XAML, and some of the page, some of this class, you're going to spell out in code. And what's going to happen is at runtime, that XAML is going to be turned into C# code, so you're really going to have a C# class that's going to do what it is that your class needs to do. So what is XAML? Well, XAML is a form of XML, extended markup language. And if you are unfamiliar with that, you should Google it or use ChatGPT to give you a quick mini lecture on it. I'm going to give a mini lecture on XML. So XML consists of a series of elements. Elements appear in less than and greater than signs, such as label right here. Let's bring this up so I can do a little bit of doodling here. So label is an example of an element, button is an example of an element, and so forth. These all appear in an XML file, which is a sort of an ordinary text file. Now I'm using XML. XAML is a specific kind of XML, but this applies in general. XML elements have this form, and they are assembled into an XML page. Switching to XAML in particular, when Microsoft says that you have a XAML element called label, that corresponds to a C# class. So if you have a XAML element called label, there's also a C# class called label. You will define in your XAML, you will define all the elements that you want. And at runtime, what is going to happen is each one of the elements that you have named in XAML is going to be instantiated. And so you will basically be creating a series of classes, arranging how they are going to appear on the screen, and so forth. But instead of writing the code to do it, you're going to be laying it out in XAML. And I think you'll find that to be a lot easier to do. When you create XAML, actually this still also applies to XML, but when you create XAML in particular, in addition to the name of the element, you can provide what are called attributes. So for instance, there's the XName attribute. There is the text attribute. Both of these are attributes of a label. And these XAML attributes correspond to C# properties. So let's hop over to button. Here's another element called button. And it has this element has an attribute called text. The button class has a property called text. And when in XAML you say button and then text equals click me, you are basically assigning this value to the text property of a button object. When you say clicked equals handle click, again, clicked is the name of an attribute in XAML. This corresponds to a property in the button class. And when you assign handle click to it, when you assign it to the attribute, you are also assigning it, you are in effect assigning it to the property in the button object that you're working with. So this is all a little bit sort of theoretical and a bit hard to understand. So let's take a look at an example. Let's see here. Let me just go to the next slide here. So this is a simple example. When you create a XAML, when you create a .NET MAUI app, there is a template that is provided for you. And this is what you're going to see in the template. let's actually just take a look at this so you can see what's going on. All right, so I have brought up Windows here, Windows in a window, and I'm going to launch Visual Studio 2022. And I am simply going to create a new project. And I could search for the template. I've already been using it, so I need the .NET MAUI app template. Click on Next. Give it a name. Throw away forever. And place the solution and project in the same directory. So we've already done this. Use .NET 7. Please use that. And then it's going to go ahead and create a project. You'll see when we're looking at this project, there are a whole lot of different files that get created. This is taking some time because it's got a fair amount of work to do. Also, it is running on an emulator, and I have a whole bunch of different applications running, so it's going to take some time. Thanks to the power of pause, though, we can speed that up. All right, so here is our .NET MAUI project. It consists of a number of different folders, and it consists of some XAML files as well. All right, so we have here a folder for resources. Everything that your app needs, from images to fonts to icons and so forth, these all live here. There are specific folders that have been created for each of the different platforms that you're working on. If you need something specific for iOS, you would put it here. You also have some properties. Nobody knows what that's about. And then you have our main page.xaml. So this is the content page that is going to be instantiated first and what the user is going to see. So we can see our XAML here. It consists, again, these are XAML elements. And usually, if you have a sort of a container element, it will have a starting tag. So this is the starting tag, the beginning of the content page, and this is the end of the content page. And everything between this tag on line 41 and this tag that starts on line 1, everything here is going to be embedded in a content page. Now, what gets embedded? Well, it's actually just one thing. From the perspective of the content page, it just knows to put in a scroll view. What's a scroll view? Well, like the name suggests, it's a control that allows you to display more than you've got screen height for. So it allows you to scroll through things. What are we going to scroll through? One thing. What is called a vertical stack layout. So a vertical stack layout, this too contains a number of items, and these are going to be stacked vertically on top of one another. How do you know that? Because it's called a vertical stack layout. You have a number of attributes here, so everything is going to be vertically centered. That means that it's going to be, let's just bring up our screen brush for a moment here. So if we think about let's go here. If we think about this representing a vertical layout, everything is going to be centered. All right, that didn't work out well. I think you know what the word centered means, though, so we'll just gloss over that. And what you're going to see is an image, 2 labels, and a button. So this is what it's going to look like when the thing is finished. All right, so you can see we've got an image stacked on top of a label, stacked on top of another label, stacked on top of a button. So pretty easy to understand, right? I mean, this is just, you're just sort of reading it almost in English, and you can see that we have these attributes. So the source, let's keep our picture here. In fact, I'm going to switch to coherence if I can do this. Let's see if I can accomplish this. Coherence is something that Parallels offers, so you can see just the application. All right, there we go. So right now we've got the source is .NET bot.png. So it's actually looking in resources, in images, and this is the file that it's going to display. This is called SVG. This is called PNG. There's a fascinating reason why those two are not the same. We're going to skip over it right now. Again, some of these, most of these attributes are pretty obvious. A label has a font size of 32. This label has a font size of 18. The text is what you see. Now again, we could have done all of this in code. We could have said new label, and we could have said, let's suppose we called our label hello. We could have said hello.text equals, hello.semanticproperties.heading level equals. We could have set all of these properties. They're actually attributes in XAML. We could have set them as properties in code, but we don't want to do that. We only have a very small amount of actual code. So let's go ahead and open up our main page.xaml.cs. So when you talk about a XAML page, there will be two files involved, the XAML page and the XAML.cs page. And in the, I want to show both of these at the same time if I can. So let me just bring this. That's not really what I was looking for. Let's see, I'll put this here. There we go. Okay, so we've got our XAML on top. We have the corresponding CS, which represents the actual C# code, on the bottom. And you can see this is a partial class called main page. It is a type of content page. And it's got a constructor. When it calls initialize component, what that does is it goes, basically you can think of this as going into the XAML, making all of these objects. So it's instantiating an image, a label, and so forth. For some of these objects, it's giving them names. This is an important bit. I've got a button here with an X name of counter button. That means that in code, I can access it. So notice here I'm saying counter button.text. I am now going to change the text property of this button. And we can see it happen right here. Ooh, it changed. Click one time, click two times. Oh, this is tremendous fun. So the X name is an extremely important attribute because it is a mechanism that allows you to interact in code with XAML elements that you have created in, of course, XAML. And as long as we're exploring this code, this is the code that's getting executed on counter clicked. The reason that this is getting executed is because we set the clicked attribute to be on counter clicked. So it is looking for a method in the CS file. Again, we have mainpage.xaml, and this file is named mainpage.xaml.cs. It is looking there for a method that is void, has two arguments, an object and event args. The object called sender, this is the name, this represents the object that triggered this method. And because it was a button, this sender here is actually a button. However, because of how this is structured, it's got it as just as an object. If you needed to typecast, you could typecast to make it into a button, but we already have access to the counter button directly because of this attribute here, the XName attribute. One other small thing, you might be wondering about what's this $sign doing here. This allows you to do what's called string interpolation. So if you just had an ordinary string and you ran this, it would just print clicked count times. It would print that out literally. Because of the fact that we have a $sign here, it looks in here, and for anything in curly brackets, it replaces it with the value of the expression. In this case, a simple variable called count. All right, so let's hop back into our keynote here. And let's see, there are a few other things here. Namespaces, do we really need to talk about namespaces here? This is a very confusing topic when you see it for the first time, and honestly, we don't need to worry about it at this point. So I'm just going to skip over this for just a moment. So this shows you the XAML process. So you're going to start off with a XAML file, and it, along with the code behind file, the xaml.cs file, is going to produce a file that I believe if you dig hard enough you can find, .xaml.g.cs. This generated file is probably going to be very difficult to read, but it will specify the entire C# class. So when we have a main class, this is going to look like code. I think we'd have to go digging for it, and that's certainly not what we need to know. All right, I had said that the unit of .NET MAUI application is a content page. There are other pages, flyout pages, navigation pages, and tab pages. And most likely for your app, you're not just going to have one content page. You're going to have a series of pages. And at the highest level of your app in terms of architecture, you might use a tab page design where you have a series of tabs and you can jump from one content page to another just by tapping on a particular tab. Or you might use a navigation page, such as you'll see in apps where you have like a table and you go from one level to another, sort of diving down into some hierarchical data. I'm going to actually give a demonstration of that right here. I'm not sure what I just launched. I guess I'll find out here in a moment. All right, so here we have, I think this is an older version of this app. But anyways, this is supposed to be navigation. So if I click on navigation, I want to see all the action movies. And this is networked, and it might be a little on the slow side. Also, it's a simulator. So here are all the comedies: Men in Black, Deadpool, Inside Out. Let's take a look at Inside Out. And this is the cast of Inside Out. It's actually going to a remote database called CockroachDB, which we'll study later. We'll go back to genres. Let's take a look at science fiction. Let's see who was in Blade Runner and so forth. So that's an example of navigation. We can also, let's see if I got this here. Do I have any? I don't know. Now I'm going to have to figure out how to navigate through Android. I think I can do it. So here we've got something called Taborama. That sounds promising. So we have a series of different tabs, and we can jump from one to another. You're all familiar with this, so really we don't need to belabor this any more than we already have. When you lay out your XAML elements, there are a number of different layout elements that allow you to do it. We've already seen the vertical stack layout, which is a kind of stack layout. We have what's called an absolute layout, where you specify, basically, you give coordinates for items. We won't use that in this class. And we will most likely be using the grid layout, where you can specify rows and columns for elements, and you can specify if those elements occupy just one column, or perhaps span multiple columns, or span multiple rows. And then you have something called a flex layout, which is similar to something that's been used with great, and it's been used to great advantage in web development. All right, I'm not entirely sure how long I've been talking for, but it seems like I've been talking for an hour and a half because I've been recording these videos over and over again until I get them right. So we are going to wrap up this video. This is video 1, and we'll be coming back with video 2, talking more about .NET MAUI and XAML. So be sure to stay tuned for that.